Allow me to pose a question, one that perhaps challenges what you believe you know about Roman history and the very nature of absolute power. What if I told you that one of Rome's most infamous emperors, whose image has become synonymous with tyranny and depravity, was also its most extravagant and brazen performer, an artist utterly obsessed with the grand stage of his own empire? Imagine this. What if I told you that this same man, in a macabre theatrical flourish, once suffocated his dinner guests with a torrent of rose petals, purely for dramatic effect, for the sheer visual impact of it all? Or that his Domus Aurea, his legendary golden palace, was not merely a building, a grand imperial residence, but a 200-acre middle finger, a gilded slap in the face to the entire Roman Empire, a declaration of power utterly without limits. We are not speaking here of a Shakespearean villain plucked from classical tragedy, nor a complex antihero from a modern Netflix series. No, we are speaking of Nero, Rome's fifth emperor, but also its most audacious artist, its most notorious arsonist, and the architect, piece by agonizing piece, of his own spectacular downfall. He wasn't simply mad in the conventional sense of the word. He elevated madness to an art form, to a grandiose performance that encompassed an entire empire, with Rome itself serving as his principal stage. In the moments to come, we will travel nearly 2,000 years back in time. We will delve into the twisting corridors of imperial palaces, sneak backstage at Nero's not-so-optional concerts, where attendance was mandatory under pain of punishment, and immerse ourselves in the dark, fascinating, and often disturbing psychology of a man who governed Rome not as a state, but as if it were his own personal theater. But before we plunge into the fire that consumed Rome, the fame that blinded him, and the funerals that marked his inevitable end, allow me to take you back to the very beginning, to the cradle of a child born amidst the bitter betrayal and intricate intrigue of the court. A child who, ironically, was destined to rule a world, a vast and complex empire that, in its deepest essence, he never truly understood. In the year 37 AD, amidst the grandeur and the shadowed intrigues of imperial Rome, a baby boy was welcomed into what would prove to be the most cursed and perilous family tree in all of history. His name, bestowed upon him at birth, was Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, though the world, for all its subsequent horror and fascination, would forever remember him by a single infamous moniker: Nero. His arrival into the world was less a moment of joyous celebration and more a chilling political omen. His mother, Agrippina the Younger, was a woman forged in the crucible of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. She was the ultimate survivor in a treacherous world defined by the glint of daggers and the subtle poison of diplomacy. His father, Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, was known less for any discernible parenting skills and more for his chillingly prophetic declaration, made upon hearing of his son's birth, that any child born of himself and Agrippina was destined to be the ruin of the world. Indeed, by the time the infant Nero was merely 2 years old, his father was dead. And that, chillingly, was just the beginning of a life shaped not by the warmth of parental love or nurturing affection, but by the cold, calculating hand of leverage and manipulation. He was, from his earliest consciousness, a mere pawn in his formidable mother's relentless game. A boy raised not with soothing lullabies or innocent bedtime stories, but with the insidious whispers of poison, the intoxicating allure of ambition, and the burning desire for revenge. Growing up within the hallowed, yet utterly treacherous, confines of the Julio-Claudian dynasty wasn't like being born into a typical royal family, with its predictable rituals and secure succession. No. It was far more akin to being thrust from birth into a never-ending, high-stakes political reality show, where every sibling, every cousin, every distant relative could potentially be an assassin, and where any given dinner might, quite literally, prove to be your last. Survival was a daily, brutal gamble. From his earliest, impressionable years, Nero absorbed one brutal, undeniable truth. Trust was not merely a luxury, it was a dangerous vulnerability he simply could not afford. He watched, with a precocious and chilling detachment, as emperors rose and fell, as loyalty was bought and sold for fleeting power, and as the very foundations of the Roman state shifted beneath the feet of its rulers. Slowly, inexorably, he absorbed the most brutal lesson of all. In Rome, in this cutthroat arena of power, survival meant absolute control. And as you will soon discover, Nero didn't just learn that lesson. He internalized it, twisted it, and then turned it into a singular one-man performance, a terrifying spectacle of power and madness that the world would never, for all its attempts to forget, truly erase from its memory. Long before young Nero ever touched a throne, long before his name became synonymous with imperial madness, His formidable mother, Agrippina the Younger, was already ruling, quietly, cleverly, and with an iron will from the shadows. She was the true power behind the nascent throne, a master manipulator in a court rife with intrigue. In 49 AD, Agrippina orchestrated and pulled off one of the most scandalous, yet undeniably brilliant power moves in all of Roman history. With a calculated audacity that shocked even the jaded Roman elite, she seduced and then married her own uncle, the reigning Emperor Claudius. Yes, her uncle. This incestuous union was not born of affection, but of pure, unadulterated ambition. Because in the cutthroat world of Rome, where bloodlines dictated destiny and alliances shifted like desert sands, the shortest, most direct path to ultimate power often looped right back through the twisted branches of the family tree. But Agrippina, ever the strategist, didn't stop there. Her ambition knew no bounds, her vision extended far beyond a mere marriage. With relentless persuasion and cunning, she convinced the aging and increasingly pliable Claudius to adopt Nero, her own son, naming him as the legitimate heir to the empire. This was a direct usurpation of the rightful succession, as it bypassed Claudius's own biological son, Britannicus. This wasn't merely a doting mother's dream for her child. It was a meticulously crafted masterplan, a grand design for dynastic control. And she executed it with terrifying precision, leaving no room for error. Every single step she took was calculated, every move a chess piece in her imperial game. She systematically replaced palace officials with her loyal allies, ensuring her eyes and ears were everywhere. She meticulously orchestrated Nero's public image, presenting him as the ideal virtuous successor. And with chilling ruthlessness, she slowly, inexorably erased anyone, any rival, any obstacle, any potential threat, who stood between her beloved son and the imperial throne. When Claudius finally died, suspiciously it must be noted, after partaking of some rather potent poison mushrooms, Nero ascended to the imperial purple at the tender age of just 16. But let's be absolutely clear. Agrippina was still calling the shots. Her influence was absolute, her control unwavering. For a significant period, Rome didn't truly get Nero the ruler. They got Agrippina the regent, a formidable force of nature, wrapped in her son's imperial robes, wielding power with an authority that belied her unofficial status. She attended Senate meetings, her presence a silent challenge to the male-dominated assembly. She dictated policy, her will often overriding the advice of seasoned senators. She treated Rome's most decorated generals like mere schoolboys, her intellect and ambition dwarfing theirs. Nero was, for all intents and purposes, just the handsome, youthful face of the empire. Agrippina was its true, undisputed power. But even the most powerful puppeteer, the most brilliant architect of destiny, often forgets one crucial, immutable rule of human nature. Give a teenage boy, especially one raised in such a volatile environment, too much power, too much control, too much unchecked authority, and eventually, inevitably, he cuts the strings. And when Nero finally decided to cut those strings, the consequences would be catastrophic for Agrippina and for Rome itself. Imagine, if you will, the sheer audacity, the breathtaking gamble. Giving the keys to an entire, sprawling empire, the mightiest civilization the world had ever known, to a mere teenager. That, astonishingly, is precisely what Rome did in 54 AD. At the tender age of 16, Nero found himself wielding more wealth, commanding more influence, and possessing more absolute power than any modern-day influencer or TikTok star could ever dream of. Yet, he possessed the emotional maturity of, well, a 16-year-old. A volatile cocktail of boundless authority and adolescent impulse. At first, to the surprise of many, things seemed to proceed with an almost unnatural stability. The early years of Nero's reign were, remarkably, marked by competent governance. But this had little to do with Nero's own burgeoning statesmanship. The true architect of this fragile peace was his formidable mother, Agrippina, who still pulled the levers of power with an unseen but undeniable grip. Moreover, the steady hands and wise counsel of trusted advisors like the philosopher Seneca and the Praetorian prefect Burrus kept the vast state machinery humming, guiding the young emperor with a firm paternal influence. Yet beneath this veneer of calm, an insidious pressure was building. Nero possessed the imperial crown, the ultimate symbol of authority, but he chafed under the suffocating lack of genuine control. He was a boy emperor trapped in a man's world, a gilded cage, and his mother's omnipresent grip, once a source of security, was slowly but inexorably beginning to choke him. The puppet, however gilded, longed to sever its strings. Then came Acte. A former slave, a commoner, a woman utterly outside the aristocratic circles of Rome, and, unfortunately for Agrippina, the undeniable object of Nero's burgeoning teenage affection. Agrippina, ever the calculating matriarch, vehemently disapproved. She voiced her displeasure publicly, viciously, with all the cutting scorn of a Roman noblewoman. Her objection wasn't rooted in class prejudice alone, though that certainly played a part. It was because this forbidden love made Nero unpredictable, a variable she could not control, a threat to her meticulously crafted dynastic plan. Agrippina, in a catastrophic miscalculation of her son's burgeoning will, humiliated him openly in court, reminding him with brutal clarity who truly held the leash of imperial power. And in doing so, with every cutting word, she unwittingly planted the indelible seed of rebellion deep within Nero's volatile psyche. Nero complied for a time. He retreated, seemingly chastened. But love denied, passion suppressed, does not simply vanish. It transforms, becoming anger stored, resentment festering beneath the surface. And with each subsequent confrontation, each perceived slight, Nero's desire for independence, no, for absolute dominance, for the unchallengeable authority of the emperor, grew sharper, more desperate, more dangerous. Behind the opulent palace walls, tensions crackled like static electricity before a storm. Nero began listening less to the measured counsel of his wise advisors and more to the honeyed whispers of flatterers, those who pandered to his every whim and encouraged his most extravagant impulses. Less to reason, more to raw, unchecked impulse. And while the vast Roman populace still saw a promising, if somewhat eccentric, young emperor, behind the gilded curtains of the imperial court, a darker, more volatile version of Nero was meticulously preparing to take center stage. The performance, it seemed, was only just beginning. By the time Nero turned 21, the thin veneer of filial obedience had worn away entirely. He was done playing the dutiful, compliant son, done being the gilded puppet on his mother's strings. And Agrippina, the architect of his ascent, the formidable matriarch who had so meticulously crafted his path to power, was about to learn the brutal, unforgiving cost of raising a lion, then foolishly trying to leash it. The student, it seemed, was ready to surpass and indeed destroy the master. Into this simmering cauldron of resentment and ambition stepped Poppaea Sabina, a woman of breathtaking beauty, razor-sharp ambition, and a cunning intellect. She was every bit as manipulative as Agrippina, perhaps even more so. But crucially, she was younger, sharper, and far more dangerous in the impressionable, volatile eyes of Nero. Poppaea possessed an acute understanding of Nero's deepest desires, a perception that Agrippina, blinded by her own maternal control, utterly lacked. She saw what Agrippina couldn't or wouldn't. Nero didn't truly want advice, he didn't crave wise counsel. He wanted boundless applause, uncritical adoration, and absolute freedom to indulge his every whim. And Poppaea, with a seductive grace, gave him exactly that, while quietly, subtly whispering one deadly, irresistible idea into his ear: cut the cord. Permanently. The first act of this grim drama was political exile. Nero, asserting his newfound imperial will, systematically stripped his mother of her bodyguards, effectively isolating her. He then banished her from the opulent palace, sending her to a lonely, secluded villa by the sea. But mere isolation, he instinctively knew, wasn't enough. He understood deep down, with the chilling clarity of a predator, that Agrippina's true power wasn't derived from her position, but from her sheer, indomitable presence. As long as she breathed, as long as she existed, her shadow would loom over his reign. So he tried to kill her. His first attempt was a macabre, almost theatrical scheme. A sabotaged boat, meticulously designed to sink quietly in the dead of night, making her death appear a tragic accident at sea. But Agrippina, ever the survivor, a woman who had cheated death countless times in the viper's nest of the Roman court, miraculously swam to shore. Wounded, furious, and terrifyingly, undeniably alive. That night Rome whispered, its elite holding its breath, sensing the dark currents of imperial intrigue. The next morning, Nero, consumed by a chilling panic, realized the gravity of his failure. There would be no second trick, no elaborate ruse. He sent assassins, hardened men loyal only to his command, to finish what the treacherous sea could not. And just like that, with a brutal finality, the woman who had so meticulously built an emperor, who had sacrificed everything to place him on the throne, was utterly erased by the very creation she had brought into being. Most sons, even in the most brutal of times, would crumble under the immense psychological weight of murdering their own mother. Nero, he threw a party, a lavish celebratory feast, as if marking a grand triumph. To him, this wasn't a tragedy, not a moment of profound guilt or sorrow. It was, in his twisted perception, a glorious liberation, the final, decisive act of defiance against the chains that had bound him. And with Agrippina gone, her formidable presence finally extinguished, Nero no longer needed to pretend. The puppet had at last cut its strings, and now, truly unfettered, the imperial show was about to get very, very strange. The stage was his, and the audience, Roman and beyond, would soon witness a performance unlike any other. For Nero, mere power was never enough. The cold, hard grip of imperial authority, the vast wealth, the unquestioning command, these were but tools to a grander, more profound desire. He didn't just want to rule Rome, he yearned for Rome to love him, to worship him, to applaud him with a fervor reserved for the gods themselves. His ambition transcended politics, it was a craving for adoration. So with the stage of the empire now entirely his own, he set about reinventing himself. Not as a shrewd statesman, guiding the vast machinery of government, not as a triumphant general, expanding Rome's formidable borders, but as a star, a performer, the greatest artist the world had ever seen, with Rome as his captive audience. He shed the austere traditional imperial robes for glittering Greek tunics, flamboyant and un-Roman. He picked up a lyre, a stringed instrument favored by poets and musicians, and began performing first in private, for a select, often terrified audience, then increasingly brazenly in public. These recitals quickly escalated from mere performances into mandatory marathons, grueling spectacles that could last for hours. Rome's elite, its senators, its generals, its most distinguished citizens, were literally dragged into concert halls where clapping wasn't merely optional, it was a matter of survival, a desperate act of self-preservation. The lengths to which the Roman aristocracy went to escape these torturous performances became legendary. Some feigned sudden, debilitating illnesses, hoping to be excused. Others pretended to faint from sheer exhaustion or artistic rapture. A few, in a grim testament to their desperation, allegedly played dead, carried out on stretchers, rather than endure another note of the emperor's off-key warbling. But Nero, in his profound self-delusion, didn't care. He was impervious to their suffering, deaf to their silent pleas. Because in his mind, he wasn't forcing them into submission. He was blessing them with his unparalleled art, bestowing upon them the divine gift of his genius. When critics, brave or foolish enough to whisper their disdain, dared to murmur, "This isn't what emperors do. This is beneath the dignity of Rome," he would simply reply with an air of dismissive superiority, "Then they don't understand greatness. They don't understand true artistry." His artistic pursuits knew no bounds. He competed fiercely in poetry slams, engaging in dramatic acting duels, and participating in various music festivals across the empire. In 67 AD, in the ultimate display of his unshakable belief in his own superiority, he even entered the venerable Olympic Games, a sacred tradition of athletic prowess. He raced chariots, fell out mid-race in a spectacular tumble, and yet somehow still crowned himself the undisputed winner, claiming every single prize. Why? Because Nero didn't believe in the harsh, inconvenient realities of objective truth or fair competition. He believed in performance. He believed in his own narrative. And in his meticulously crafted show, there were no losers, only audience members who hadn't applauded loud enough, who hadn't recognized his transcendent genius. Rome watched, a mixture of horror, bewilderment, and simmering resentment. This wasn't mere eccentricity, the harmless quirk of a powerful man. This was delusion, absolute and terrifying, wielded with the full, unchallengeable weight of a crown. And while Nero, utterly consumed by his role as the divine artist, played out his grand performance, Rome, the ancient, enduring city, began slowly but inexorably, preparing for its final, tragic act. The stage was set for a conflagration. In July of 64 AD, the eternal city, Rome, lit up the night, but not with the vibrant festivals or the joyful fireworks that usually celebrated its grandeur. It lit up with flames. With a conflagration that, for many, felt like the end of the known world. A fire, of uncertain origin and still debated today, broke out near the vast Circus Maximus, a place of entertainment and bustle that would soon become the epicenter of devastation. The fire, implacable and voracious, unleashed itself with unprecedented fury. It roared uncontrollably for 6 days and 7 nights, mercilessly consuming 2/3 of the glorious city and leaving thousands of its inhabitants homeless, plunged into despair. Ancient temples, bustling markets, entire neighborhoods full of life and memory, simply vanished into columns of smoke and ash erased from the map. In the immediate aftermath of the catastrophe, 2 questions, urgent and laden with suspicion, were on every Roman's lips. Who started it, and perhaps even more unsettling, where was Nero? The official version, the one the empire hastily disseminated, dictated that it had been a tragic accident, a fatality of fate. But the whispers, those furtive voices that spread through the streets and taverns, pointed directly to the imperial palace. Some claimed Nero ordered the fire with a macabre purpose: to clear vast tracts of land for the construction of his megalomaniacal Domus Aurea, his golden palace. Others, with a mixture of horror and fascination, recounted that the emperor had stood on a balcony, watching the city burn, playing the lyre with chilling indifference, a human soundtrack to his own personal horror movie. Technically, it is true that Nero was not even in Rome when the fire started. He was in Antium, his coastal villa. However, when he returned to the capital, his actions were curious, to say the least. He opened his vast imperial estates to give refuge to the thousands of displaced. He organized large-scale relief efforts, distributing food and supplies to the desperate populace. At first, he presented himself as a compassionate emperor, a leader who cared for his people. And then, with an audacity that bordered on the sacrilegious, he built a colossal gold-plated palace right on the smoking ashes of the destroyed city. It was not simply opulent, it was obscene. The Domus Aurea, the Golden House, sprawled across 200 acres, a palatial complex of proportions never before seen. It featured a private lake, dining rooms with rotating ceilings that mimicked celestial movements, and a gigantic 100-foot bronze statue of himself, dominating the landscape, a brazen affirmation of his self-proclaimed divinity. Rome, still smelling of smoke and despair, observed this ostentation with growing fury. And Nero, oblivious to the storm that was brewing, was about to discover that even an emperor cannot defy the will of his people indefinitely. Imagine, if you can, the desolation. Your city, the great Rome, reduced to smoking rubble, your neighbors helpless, homeless, without comfort. Your ancient temples turned to ash, the echo of their prayers drowned by the silence of destruction. Now imagine your emperor, the supposed protector of the republic and the people, responds to this catastrophe by building himself a pleasure palace, a golden fantasy upon the still-hot ruins. That was Nero's next and perhaps most infamous move. The Domus Aurea, or Golden House, wasn't simply an imperial residence. It was a living monument to megalomania, an architectural declaration of a limitless ego, a direct affront to the misery of his people. Stretching majestically from the Palatine to the Esquiline Hills, this 200-acre fantasy land had everything, and more. Gold-leafed walls that gleamed under the sun, jewel-studded ceilings that mimicked constellations, ivory fountains that poured scented water. There was a main dining room that rotated with the movement of the stars, a marvel of ancient engineering. The ceilings were designed to rain flower petals and exotic perfumes upon guests, a sensory experience that, according to accounts, sometimes ended in suffocation. Even a man-made lake was constructed, because a natural one, it seemed, wasn't dramatic enough for Nero's vision. And at the entrance to this obscene wonder, a colossal bronze statue of Nero himself, 100 feet tall, with arms outstretched, greeting Rome like a god returning from Olympus, a self-proclaimed deity demanding adoration. And the cost of this unprecedented extravagance? Taxpayer money, the sweat and blood of the Roman people. While Nero reveled in his golden delusion, Rome bled. The imperial treasury was bankrupt. Grain prices soared, leading to famine. The provinces, squeezed to their limit, began to murmur about rebellion. But Nero not only didn't cut back on his expenses, he doubled down. He hosted sumptuous banquets, endless concerts, and private recitals inside his golden fantasy, oblivious to the misery that surrounded him. Opulence had become lethal. Guests, in their pursuit of pleasure, were sometimes suffocated by the cascade of flowers or poisoned by exotic dishes gone wrong. Luxury in Nero's court had become a weapon. For the Senate, for Rome's old guard, the palace was more than an obscene extravagance. It was dangerous. An undeniable symbol that their emperor no longer lived in the same world as his people, that he had lost all contact with reality and the responsibilities of his office. And while Nero admired his own reflection in the gold-plated walls, his enemies, both within and outside the court, began sharpening their blades in the shadows. Rome's patience was wearing thin, and the stage was set for the final act of a tragedy. By 68 AD, the curtain of Roman patience had drawn back for the very last time. Nero, the emperor-artist, had exhausted his encores. The Senate, that venerable body which had once been the heart of Rome, hated him with a cold, calculated passion. The military, the very backbone of the empire, despised him for his frivolity and his utter disinterest in martial affairs. Even his personal guard, the loyal Praetorians, the last line of defense for any emperor, had switched sides, seduced by promises of a new regime. But Nero, in his bubble of delusion, what was he doing? He went on tour. Instead of defending Rome, of confronting the imminent crisis, he was in Greece, lost in his fantasy. He sang, he performed, and he won rigged competitions, utterly convinced of his own unparalleled greatness. On one occasion, he even fell off his chariot mid-race at the Olympic Games, and with the same shamelessness as always, he awarded himself the gold. When he finally returned to Rome, he did not do so with the laurels of a military victory, but with an extravagant triumph parade, celebrating his artistic achievements, as if the lyre and the stage were more important than the sword and the empire. The final straw came when several provincial governors, fed up with his tyranny and misrule, openly rebelled. The Senate, sensing the shift in the winds and the emperor's profound weakness, acted with a long-suppressed audacity. They declared Nero a public enemy. And suddenly, the all-powerful emperor of Rome was a fugitive. He fled in disguise, cloaked in his own fear, accompanied only by a handful of loyal slaves who, with an incomprehensible fidelity, remained by his side. At a friend's villa, cornered and stripped of his grandiosity, panic seized him. He dug his own grave, a pathetic and symbolic act. He quoted poetry, seeking solace in the words of others. He begged someone, anyone, to kill him, utterly incapable of making the final decision himself. When soldiers finally arrived to arrest him, Nero knew the curtain had dropped. The performance was over. But still, he couldn't write the end of his own story. He had to be helped, stabbed in the throat by his loyal and perhaps merciful secretary. His last words, "Too late, this is fidelity," cryptic, self-pitying peak Nero. And just like that, as dramatically as he had lived, the last emperor of the Julio-Claudian dynasty vanished. Dead at 30, no applause, no elegy, no empire, but history, like a surging river, did not end there. In the chaos that followed, a year of anarchy that saw 4 emperors ascend and fall, Rome nearly tore itself apart. The Senate, in a desperate attempt to restore order and erase the shame, tried to erase Nero from history. They destroyed his statues, chiseled off his name from monuments. But the irony, the great irony of his legacy is this: the more they tried to forget him, the more unforgettable he became. Even today, Nero lives on in books, in films, in operas, in the collective imagination, and now in this story. An enduring reminder that sometimes the most dangerous emperors are the ones who, in their delusion, believe they are artists.